Okay, now we're all sorted. Before we get started, I'd love to get a gauge of who we've got in the room. Are there any brewers in the room? Yay! Do we have any marketers in the room? Nice. Any designers in the room? Yeah. And people just here for the free beer? Everyone! Awesome. My name's Jessie. I run and I'm the creative director of Craft Instinct, which is a branding design agency that specialises in craft beverages. And we mainly do craft beer. I'd say 85% of what we do is around beer, and that is because I'm obsessed with beer and I started the company, so what I say goes. Today session will be a little bit of speaking and a little bit of workshopping. My main hope today is that everyone will leave with a bit of an understanding of not just about what authenticity is, but also how you can make your own businesses more authentic as well. And also at the end, we're going to have a plan to get you to be more authentic with your brand in order to be able to follow all the fun fads and trends that we have in craft beer without losing yourself along the way. Going to get started with the tale of two breweries, creatively named Brewery A and Brewery B. Brewery A opened up their doors with a core range of beers, really trendy labels, as you can see, and they soon had a really good local following. They watched other breweries succeed with releasing some different types of beers that were different to their core following, and they wanted a bit of a slice of that pie because those breweries were making lots of money off this new trend. So they started to releasing beers that were different to their main offering. They watched other breweries produce labels that were really cool and trendy, and they wanted to be really seen as really cool and trendy and relevant, and they started changing up their labels and their core labels too to follow along. However, with all this change, the customers started to not recognise them. They were unsure what they stood for, and they didn't know what they were buying into. Brewery A, poor old Brewery A, tried to be so many different things. They tried on so many different hats, they forgot what they started out to be in the first place. Their sales went down and their budgets also went down. Then they relied on cheap labels and their sales went down even further. Poor old Brewery A closed their doors because they could no longer compete with the crew down the road. Brewery B is the crew down the road. They started exactly the same way as Brewery A, except they had a plan. They decided to work on their brand foundation, their values, their purpose, their story, and their tone of voice. They identified their target audience, but also some other gaps in the market that they thought they'd be able to target as well. Flexibility was really important to Brewery B when it came to brewing styles, but also within their artwork. So they built this into their plan too. Just like Brewery A, they also opened their doors with a really good solid core range, some trendy beer labels, and they soon had a really good local following too. They mapped out a release plan according to their audience's target audience's taste, not their own, and they started releasing beers. They started releasing beers outside of their core range as well as promoting the ones in their core range, all according to their plan. They kept to that plan, and that allowed them to be flexible and responsive to new styles of beer. They grew their audience, they stayed true to their original brand foundation while they were testing the market with new ideas. Momentum grew, they controlled how the public saw them and about how the public perceived their sub-brands as well. They ended up selling a zillion beers to a zillion customers, and they achieved all the success, and they stayed true to what they started out to be in the first place. So from the outside, we can see where Brewery A went wrong. Both breweries want the same thing: huge range in sales, flexibility, all the customers, all the success in the world. But of course, Brewery B was the only one to succeed. And we can see why, obviously, because they had a plan and Brewery A didn't. But we all know that when we go to work, when you leave this session now, we go back after Good Beer Week and we start working in our everyday lives, that we go, yeah, brand values, yeah, core purpose, blah, 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 blah. This is way more important than that. It's very strange how us humans do that, because really, like, this can actually make or break our business that we're so passionate about and we work so hard to do. And we have such a challenge in having clarity to see the bigger picture. So where does this knee-jerk reaction come from? That can just, I guess it's a knee-jerk reaction to follow fads and trends, really, with absolute disregard to our brand that we've spent so much time working on. This is all her fault. This is Lucy. Yeah, you guys know you, Lucy. She's an ape-like creature that walked about the Earth about 3.5 million years ago. She forever changed humanity's understanding of how we evolved and how our species came to be, how we are now. Lucy lived in a tribal structure. A tribal structure is where multiple families live together in a communal sort of style of way, and they all have one common goal, which is survival. They also all work together, and they have a great sense of belonging and connection to their tribe. This is a structure that humans have lived in for most of our existence. In fact, if you think about it in terms of a day, it wouldn't be until 11:55 p.m. that we stop living in a tribal structure. So it's easy to see that tribal mentality still affects our everyday thinking and being and the way we behave. Is anyone in the room not from Victoria? All right, these are the Melbourne Demons. They play in a sport called AFL. Well, these aren't the Demons, these are their fans. These good old D's, they haven't won a premiership for 55 years. Okay, so it was like 1964 since they last won a premiership. Still, every single week, these guys show up looking like this. Demons fans feel like they belong. They share a common goal. They communicate their belonging through colour. They will always be accepted amongst their tribe, and they always feel connected. Can you see where I'm going with this? Yeah. They have been backing a losing team for a literal lifetime. Why? It does not make sense. Logically, it does not make sense. The answer is tribalism. There's lots of interesting things about tribalism, whether they're relevant to a brand or not. When you're part of one tribe, you're often opposed to another. And who isn't part of the tribe is often just as important as who is. It's quite fascinating that when an opposing tribe comes along, what's fascinating is when opposing tribes can combine through shared values if another tribe comes along that's perceived as a threat. Branding harnesses the power of tribalism to create loyal customers and fans. Adidas and Nike, actually, they've aligned themselves with different tribes to increase their market share. Adidas got into the hip-hop crowd very early on in the 80s with Run DMC, and currently Nike is aligning itself with the newly liberated women in the Middle East. Tribalism is the simple need to belong. It's actually what drives trends and fashions and fads, and it is the reason why people buy your beer, whether you like it or not. We can all reflect on our own life and think about how this theory drives everyday decisions. How will people perceive me by the car I drive? What will people think of my glorious shoes that I'm wearing? What will my mates think of me if I bring this certain brand of beer to the barbecue? These are all subconscious thoughts, but it's thoughts that each and every one of us think. So, we all make these choices and we wrap ourselves in them to sort of form our own identity. And we position ourselves within groups that we want to belong. This is a really, really powerful concept for branding. The more you can isolate a specific demographic and psychographic, the better you can tell your message to your audience in a language that they understand. So, who is your brand's tribe? And when I say your brand, I mean the company that you work for. And who isn't your tribe? Believe it or not, your beer isn't right for everyone. And I'd like you guys to think about this for a couple minutes. Number 1 on your worksheet, you'll see there's a space to write down who is your tribe and who isn't. I'd love you to use there's some categories on the side for some little hints about what you can think about: interests, demographics, age. So just take a few minutes to write down who is in your tribe or who you'd like to be in your tribe and who isn't your tribe. Be back in a few. Okie dokie. Would anyone like to share who is in their tribe? Or who isn't in their tribe?
Come on, people, come on.
We've got a quiet tribe today. It's okay. All right.
I only filled in who is in my tribe because I was very slow at it. But, our breweries, our motto is beer backed by science. So we use science to make beer and analyze it. So who is in the tribe? Science-oriented people. Not necessarily scientists themselves, but just that they regard science as something highly, rather than people that really don't care about that. Beer fanatics, adventurers, who like niche and innovative products. And I started to go through the description of the sign. I thought there was a bit of an age range, but there's not really one for that. It can be either very young or the other end of the spectrum. That's about it.
That's awesome. And did you have anyone who isn't in your tribe? Although I can sort of already have a picture forming in my mind.
Yeah, well, basically the antithesis of what I just described. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so attracting this tribe that you just wrote down, you're going to have to get them to trust you. Trust you to do what exactly? Trust you to keep a promise. Branding is essentially a promise that you keep to your customers or your tribe. Here's some examples of some big brands and their brand promises. Do you trust them to keep their promise? Or are they keeping their promise? I'd say yeah, they are. Interesting thing about these is they're big faceless corporations that usually I wouldn't trust them to do anything, but I do trust them to do this. One of the cool things about the industry that we're in is that we are very small, we have faces, and we can literally communicate our promise face to face to our customers. Something to take advantage of. So I want you to think about your promise to your tribe. Number 2 on the worksheet there. You'll find some space to jot down some ideas. It might be similar to your companies if you've got a company vision or a mission statement, similar to that. But it's what you want your tribe to trust you on, no matter what. So if you can jot down some ideas, I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay. So now that you have a promise or an idea of a promise, how are you going to get your tribe to trust you to keep that promise? The answer is authenticity, what we all came here today to talk about. This is the Webster's definition of authenticity, the quality of being real or true. How do you communicate authenticity, though? It's not just a black or white thing. It has authenticity has many cogs that all need to work in harmony to make the authenticity machine work and get customers to perceive you as authentic. It's a little bit like running a brewery. As we all know, running a brewery requires lots of different cogs. You need the brewers to make the beer. You need the salespeople to sell the beer. You need the designers to design the beer labels. You need the packaging people to get you the packaging. You need to have the canning line or the bottling line running. You need to have the cases to put all those in. You need to have the accounts to make sure that the business has got enough money coming in to pay for everything. And you need to have an operations manager to make sure the whole thing is working. Authenticity is kind of the same. It has a lot of cogs to keep working. Those cogs are brand foundations, brand architecture, release structures, and the brand system design. And we're going to talk about all of them. Getting your brand foundation solidified, like Brewery B did, is a great place to start. Oh, they're my little cogs. So let's chat about brand foundations. Also, I'm going to go really quickly over all these things because if I wanted to give them the time that they all deserved, we'd literally be here until next week. So sorry if I'm skipping over this stuff, but I just want to get through and get an idea of what authenticity is to you guys. So the first brand foundation I want to chat about is a compelling story that is consistently told. It's very important to have a compelling story, but if it's not consistently told, your brand will lose authenticity. If you hear a bunch of different people telling the same story, but it all has different details, you're not going to believe that story at all, are you? So that often happens amongst breweries because you have different people telling the story. You've got sales reps out on the road, you've got bar staff at the venue, and you've got the owner telling probably what the original story is. So it's really, really important to have that consistent. Crafting a story is also hard to do. We've all got unique stories, even though our stories might be similar. 3 mates got drunk one night and decided, hey, we should open a brewery. Sound familiar? Even if that is your brewery story, though, it's going to have its own unique moments, just like we all have our own unique moments in our lives. And if you put them all together in an interesting way, you can actually craft a really cool story that's authentic. A good place to start is where it all started. Think about the moment that inspired you to start your brewery. I'll use an example of a brewery that specialises in Belgian beers, and the brewer traced it back to World War II, where his grandpa was over in serving in the army, and he was in Belgium and fell in love with Belgium-style beers, came back to Australia, started brewing them at home with his grandmother, and they had their grandson, and he was inspired by them to start brewing those beers, which is a pretty cool story. Who was involved, and after he got inspired by his grandparents, how did he get to where he is now? That's how you craft a really good story. Next in the brand foundation is your purpose. Why do you do what you do? We know that you make great beer, but why? The why is often the point that the customers find most engaging. For example, if you're asked what you do, and the Belgian beer guy said, well, I brew Belgium-style beers, it's not as interesting as if he said, well, I brew to carry on my grandparents' legacy and love for Belgian beers. That's when people's interest goes, oh, and that helps craft an authentic brand. The next brand foundation is a strong set of values. Sure, if you guys all work in established breweries, you probably have a set of brand values. Nevertheless, they are super important. Living by your values is like living by your truth. They don't change, even when losing money is involved. Shock. Communicating your values also allows you to work with people that have aligned values, and that makes your life a lot happier. That's what I discovered anyway when I went from doing graphic design for corporates and other styles of businesses to craft beer. Oh, the next foundation is a consistent tone of voice. If a brand voice chops and changes and sounds like different people, the public aren't going to perceive it as authentic. An example of this might be if you were posting on social media and one day your post was about your brew and when you were going to put your hop additions in and what type of hops they are. And the language used was very scientific, maybe a little sterile. And then the next day you posted a picture of one of your mates in their boxer shorts holding one of your beers with some Aussie larrikin type of jargon. Now, if people saw that post and the other post one after the other, they're going to be a little confused about who your brand actually is, what they stand for, and they're going to scroll on and your message is diluted. And they're not going to actually think, well, yesterday they posted that about that and their brand voice has now changed to this. It's all subconscious, but all really important in being consistent with your tone of voice, with your story, with your values. Consistency is the key. My clients get really sick of me saying the word consistent, but it's my favourite word. Oh yeah, if your brand was a personality, this is a good way to think about it. If your brand was a person, what tone of voice would they speak in? That's a fun way to get a consistent tone of voice going on across not just your social media, but all your communication points. Okay, so now we've covered our brand foundations very quickly. I want to chat about authenticity again and how to measure it. What if there was a way to measure it? Well, there is. There is a thing called an authentic brand index, and yep, that is actually a real thing. It measures a global brand's authenticity. They define 7 core characteristics of authenticity, and they measure the brands according to these characteristics. I've changed up the wording in here just to speak to our tribe's language. We've got originality, personal utility, declared beliefs, sincerity, familiarity, heritage, and momentum. If you turn to page 2 of your worksheets, you will find these core characteristics listed. And the questions beside them, I'd like you to take a few minutes to answer these questions in reference to your brand and how you think it might rate against these characteristics. And once you've done that, I'd love you to rank how you think your brand performs on these characteristics out of 10 in the column on the left-hand side. We'll give you guys a few minutes to do that. All right. Now's the fun part. We're going to talk about fads and trends. Sometimes keeping up with fads in the beer industry feels like this. I feel like this as a designer. It's exhausting. It's full on. You have to keep up with the super fast-paced industry. Things are evolving all the time. New things are trending. So let's talk about these trends and fads. Some consider the term trend and fad the same thing, but it's actually slightly different. Fad is generally considered to be a quick behaviour, while as a trend is one that sort of evolves and stays for a long time or even permanently. One of these is a fad and one of these is a trend. You can argue with me here if you want. So with fads, the more people follow them, it's quite interesting. Some people start to see the space as overcrowded, and then it'll no longer hold the same appeal. It's like when something becomes cool, the people that thought it was cool in the first place think it's uncool. Isn't that weird? It's kind of like the novelty wears off. If a fad stands the test of time, though, they do evolve into trends. Trends remain, but they do evolve. And I will remind you that a lot of people considered craft beer a fad a long time ago, but we proved them wrong. Let's take a look at the last decade in beer styles and some of the fads and trends. I've definitely missed some here, by the way, so you can come and argue with me after the session if you want. First up, we've got IPAs. Haven't they stuck around? Then we've got the juicy IPAs, which aren't to be mixed up with the hazy IPAs, which came a lot later in 2016. I'm trying to do it in chronological order here. Then we had the Pacific Ales. Remember that whole debacle? I won't argue with that either right now. And then we had sours. I put a lot of sours in here because I love sours. Kettle sours, wild and mixed fermented sours, experimental sours, sour IPAs. And then came the barrel-aged beers. They came in with full force. They barreled in, you could say. Sorry. Then we had fruited IPAs, pastry beers, milkshake IPAs, brut IPAs, fruited nitro sour smoothie imperial IPAs. Now this is coming up now, right? The better for you beers, the alcohol-free, low alcohol, low calorie beers. They're really now. And then lager's seeing a comeback because all of our taste buds are so overwhelmed from the last decade of crazy beers. We just want to drink a bloody lager again. Following fads is pretty exciting. And part of being a trend is fun. And I think it's one of the reasons why we're drawn to this industry, because we're creative and we like to push new possibilities. But it can be overwhelming and it is easy to lose yourself and your brand in. Check out the last decade in craft beer branding. It's been an interesting decade. In Australia, at the start of the decade, there were hardly any breweries, and because of this, I heard a number of breweries say it should be enough to make good beer, and it was, without having to have a label dictate sales. But now we're in 2021, the number of breweries we've got in Australia is pushing 800, and a lot of them are producing world-class beers. So it's no longer just okay to rely on making good beer to sell it. We have to think about our labels. I think the beers from 2010 looked a bit like what we could find on Google today for homebrew labels that anyone can download. But after a decade of learning and understanding the importance of label design, strong branding and positioning, our labels have really evolved, just like we have. So let's look at some of the design trends and fads of the last decade. Highly illustrated. These guys have been around since the early days of craft beer. In fact, it used to be an indicator between if a beer was craft or mainstream. Still super relevant today, and I think that's because it fits in with craft beer's fun and sort of imaginative character. Bifurcation. This trend has been in the industry for a long time, and it's held the industry in a chokehold for a long time. But it is very practical. It gives a consistent look on the shelf, and it's easy to group and categorise your beers as well. Bifurcation, by the way, is when there's an aesthetic that's cut in two, if you're wondering. I'm sure you're all visual people and know what I'm talking about. Bright. I suspect this trend was probably brought on by the need to stand out in an Instagram scroll, but nevertheless, it's still really prevalent and awesome. Patterns. I love patterns. They're such a good way to stand out on the shelf. You can really billboard your cans together. And they're really easy to work with within a set design template as well. This is a great one too. Nostalgia sort of works around the idea that today was better than yesterday. It's a way you can celebrate your history, and people relate to it really well with sort of the notion of the good old days. Minimal, the race to have as little as possible on a label. This was a pretty refreshing change when it came through, because when it started to become popular and gain momentum, it was highly illustrated cans and labels that were around, so it gave a bit of a shock to the industry. My theory with this one is with minimal graphics, there's barely anything for the viewer to sort of be visually offended by, so it has a lot wider appeal. So, what if you wanted to do it all? What if you want to be minimal and be illustrative, or you want to brew whatever the new fad or trend is at the time, or you want to be a fad maker? Well, you can do it all. It's a big reason why we all fell in love with craft beer, and you can do it all with a successful plan. A big part of this plan is your brand architecture. Brand architecture is a framework you use to determine how all of your products sit with each other, and how they relate or they differ, how they're positioned and named, how they're priced. The past few years we've seen breweries diversify their offering a lot. We've got not just barrel programs, we've got breweries that are adding distilleries, hard seltzers, ready-to-drink cocktails. They're opening up multiple venues and bars in multiple locations. And all of it's to do, to expand the reach into a different marketplace, which is smart. Excuse me. But you can cannibalize yourself doing this, and you can dilute your brand message. So it's a bit of a bloody minefield, but a way to structure it and get a plan in place to avoid those mines is with brand architecture. Brand architecture can be narrowed down into two options. Option one is a branded house. Branded house is a strong master brand. It lends itself to all of the releases that are released under that brand. And all the products have that brand logo on it, and they don't really have an individual identity. One good thing about a branded house is you invest into one clear identity, and it helps build familiarity and trust. Boat Rock are a really good example of this. They've got a core range of regular beers, but they've also got a barrel program. They've got a distillery. They release gin, rum, vodka, and a ginger ale. And they're all released under the same roof, under the one Boat Rocker banner. Option two is a house of brands. This is when you have a de-emphasized master brand that kind of falls into the background. And then it allows a whole lot of different individual brands to stand out on their own. And there's not really any visual ties back to the master brand. You can look at big corporate companies often do this. If you know AB InBev, multinational company has a whole folio of brands under its name, but you won't ever see the AB InBev logo on any of their products. The good thing about this framework is it works really well for smaller businesses too. A good example of this is Fermentum. I couldn't even find Fermentum's logo online, so I just had to put that font in. That's how de-emphasized they are. They're the parent company of Stone and Wood, and they hold a whole different house with a whole lot of different brands with different offerings. They all sit on their own and offer different IP. So, a branded house or a house of brands, which is right for you? Both have their own pros and cons. A branded house requires a lot less investment in the creation and maintenance of new brands, and all the products kind of support one another. but you do miss out on market share with different audiences, because if you try to market one of your products from the branded house to a different audience, it dilutes your overall brand message. A house of brands means you can directly target this market without diluting your message, because it's your own brand that's targeting the one market, and that's its main purpose. But you need to have the capacity to support a whole folio of brands, and that's not just creating a new brand, but it's also maintaining it with marketing and sales and budgets. Also, with a house of brands, products can compete with each other on the shelf. So it's easy to cannibalize yourself. It's something to consider as well. So when you're trying to, say you were going to release a new seltzer under your brewery, and you weren't sure whether to go with a house of brands or a branded house. You weren't sure if it's going to confuse your customers if you release a seltzer under your new name, or so should you create an entirely new brand. A good way to help you decide to do that is to think about this new offering and whether it aligns with the values of your tribe, and to see if releasing this new seltzer is going to delight your tribe or isolate them. If it's going to isolate them, you might want to release it under its own brand name, like every brewery and their dog is doing in 2021. So whether you build a branded house or a house of brands, fleshing out your brand architecture will set you up with a consistent overarching rule set. Your customers will be clear on your offering because you are clear on your plan. Another part of after you've decided whether it's a branded house or a house of brand and which framework you're going to go, deciding a release structure is the next big step. Most breweries that we work with have a similar release structure. This is Ocean Reach here, who you're all drinking at the moment. They have a core range. They have limited releases that they release just to test out over the year. If one goes really well, yeah, this guy went really well, it'll come back and be a seasonal. Then they did a little bit of a collab with, who was it, Hops to Home here. Hops to Home logo's on the label. And they also have a line extension, which is a series called Orb X, which is Mad Science Experiments in Beer. This is because the brewer there is really into brewing with different quirky things, and he doesn't want to release them under their limited or seasonals, and likes to keep experimenting. They also are really passionate about supporting artists. So they've just started a new line, which is called their Artist Series. So they use different artists from around Australia and put them on the beer label, but they also have a little gallery opening and launch night where they have a bunch of merch and feature the artist's artwork, and you can, public can come and buy their original artwork. It's pretty cool. So that's their release and structuring and design system. As you can see, also there's a really cool, well, not really cool, but it's a consistent design system that we've got going on. You can easily identify their core range from their seasonals, but all the time we've got different artwork going on in the background, but their logo and the beer style and name is consistently placed along them all. Structuring allows these guys and anyone who does a good release structure the ability to be flexible in experimentation, but always rely back on their core range as well, so they don't offend their tried and true customers. And having a design system that I just pointed out there makes their brand easily identifiable. So one of the things I just talked about was a line extension. A A line extension, or a series, I guess, is multiple beers that when they get released under the one name, also known as a series. This is the Hargraves Hill Pursuit of Hoppiness series we designed. These are the first 3. They're almost up to 10 now. They all use the same design template, so they're instantly recognisable and almost position themselves as a sub-brand to the Hargraves Hill brand. Ballistic Brewery does the same thing with the Sleep When You're Dead IPA series. And Blackman's does the same thing too with their Needs More series. Releasing these series like this creates crazy hype. So back in the day, beer lovers used to sort of clamber over each other to get the latest beer from the newest brewery. Now they clamber over each other to get the latest beer from the line extension in their favourite brewery. It's actually caused a bit of a frenzy. But it's a great part of a release structure. Next part of your release structure could be a brand extension. This would be in your house of brands. That's when you make a release of a new product into an untapped market. So that's going back to Boat Rocker, who released a gin. So branching out, but still using the same brand on a new product. It's really important to make sure that your existing tribe, though, won't be offended by this product. So you don't want to isolate them and dilute your brand because of that. And there's co-branding. It's a partnership between 2 different brands, and the product displays both of their names, also known as a collaboration. This is an awesome opportunity for both companies to tap into each other's markets and make the most of each other's followings, especially on social media. So, whether it's branded house or a house of brand, and whatever extensions you want to put out, whether it's line extensions, brand extensions, as long as it's in a planned structure with your brand foundations in front of mind and a marketing and sales budget allocation, you can follow fads to your heart's content. You can be a fad maker without damaging your brand and ending up like poor old Brewery A. So, back to our tribes. Remember our tribes? I want you to think about which tribe that you want to attract to your brewery. And maybe try and think of your brewery or your brand as a fire. Humans have and still do gather around a fire. Have you guys ever noticed that? Like, even when it's not cold, people always go and stand around a fire. Well, I'm using the fire as a very clever metaphor for your brand. So the fire is your offering, it's your brand, it's your promise that you wrote down before. Which tribe is it attracting? And which tribe do you want it to attract? Do you want it to attract one big tribe with multiple offerings, which is a branded house? Or multiple tribes with multiple offerings, which is a house of brands? You can build your fire and grow your tribes, whether it's with sub-brands, line extensions, or co-brands. As long as you've got a consistent offering, that is the key. Tend to your fires with proper attention, with proper investment, and a real focus on marketing and sales. When you make sure all of your fires are working in harmony together, they'll fuel each other. And you'll be the reason that your tribe comes together. So, what sort of fire do you need to build in order to attract your tribe that you're targeting? And what are the steps that you need to take to get there? How are you going to test out your ideas while not losing out on sales? And how are you going to do all of this while staying authentic? Well, the answer is by building an evolution strategy. Please turn to the final page on your worksheets. So, depending where you are on your brand journey, your evolution strategy could contain any or all of the things we've covered today. Your target market, your tribe, your brand foundation. Have you identified your values, purpose, story, tone of voice? Your brand architecture, are you a house of brands or a branded house? What's your release structure? Have you got a core range and limited release seasonal beer? Have you got a beer club? Line extensions, brand extensions, co-branding, all of this to keep competitive and stay relevant. And have you got a design system in place for consistent branding? I'd like you to reflect on this, on all these, and also reflect on your rankings from page 2 of the worksheets. And I'd like you to think about what your top 3 things that you'd like to change in your brewery or brand that will help you with authenticity. So if you look at page 2 of the worksheets, and we looked at that authentic brand index characteristics, if you scored low on any of those, they might be some options to consider. Once you've picked your top 3 things, we're going to put a plan in place to fix them. So on the final page of your worksheets is a 1-page plan. A 1-page plan is an awesome tool. If you haven't used it before, I highly recommend that you do. It's a way to simplify seemingly really complex things that are hard to achieve into 1 page. So the first column there is now. That's where you are. You'd write down where you are now with whatever you're trying to fix. The second column is where. That's where you'd like to be with the problem you're trying to fix. The third column is how. There's 1, 2, 3 steps in place. What are the top 3 things you can put in place to fix this problem? The fourth column is who. Who's responsible for getting those steps completed? The fifth column is the checker. Who's going to be checking in on the person who's responsible to get these things happen, and when. So by when, set yourself a deadline. If you don't have someone here or someone that you think is going to come and check on you and hold you accountable, I can check. You can give me your details and give me a date, and I promise I will call you and make sure you have done the thing you said you were going to do. But for now, please think about your top 3 things that you'd like to improve in your brand's authenticity and pop them in the now column and fill out your 1-page plan accordingly. If this is a bit much or if anyone's a bit confused, just pop up your hand and I'll come over and help you. I'll give you a few minutes. Okay, well, I know that we're in the middle of Good Beer Week. So we've probably all got places to go and things to do and lots of beer to drink. So we'll wrap it up. If any of you do have any questions at all about this, come and see me after, or I can give you a business card, give me a call. I'm always happy to chat through branding and help out a fellow beer lover. Thank you for coming along today. I hope you got something out of this. And take your worksheets home with you, keep on working on them, and I hope they help you out. Thank you.